Eric Dane once said that if you truly love someone, you should tell them out loud, even if you are afraid. Those words touched millions of people around the world because they sounded honest and brave. On screen, he was confident, charming, and strong, the kind of man who seemed impossible to break. But behind that image was a life filled with pain, struggles, and battles that most people never saw. His story was not just about fame and success. It was about loss, addiction, depression, illness, and the quiet courage it takes to keep going when everything inside you is falling apart. On February 19th, 2026, Eric Dane passed away at the age of 53. He died surrounded by the people who loved him most, his wife Rebecca Gay Hart and their daughters Billy and Georgia. The date carried a heartbreaking meaning. Exactly 20 years earlier, on that same day, he had first appeared as Dr. Mark Sloan on Grey's Anatomy, the role that made him a global star. It was as if his life had come full circle, ending on the anniversary of the moment that changed everything for him. The cause of his death was complications from ALS, short for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It is one of the most devastating diseases known to medicine. ALS slowly destroys the nerve cells that control muscle movement. At first, the symptoms can seem small: a weak hand, a stumble, a dropped object. But over time, the disease takes everything. Muscles stop working. Walking becomes impossible. Speaking becomes difficult. Swallowing becomes dangerous. Eventually, even breathing becomes a struggle. What makes ALS especially cruel is that the mind usually remains sharp. A person is fully aware of what is happening but powerless to stop it. For Eric, the disease began quietly in early 2024. He noticed weakness in his right hand and assumed it was something minor, maybe from overuse or sleeping in a bad position. Doctors sent him from one specialist to another. Hand experts, neurologists, more tests, more waiting. For months, there were no clear answers. Then came the diagnosis that changed his life forever. ALS. Terminal. No cure. Most patients live only a few years after diagnosis, sometimes less. In April 2025, he released a short public statement saying he had ALS and that he was grateful for his family's support. It sounded calm and controlled, almost peaceful. But 2 months later, he gave an emotional interview to Diane Sawyer on Good Morning America, and the world saw the reality behind that calm message. He admitted that every morning he woke up hoping it had all been a bad dream, only to remember it was real. By then, the right side of his body had already weakened significantly, and he feared the left side would soon follow. During the interview, he shared a moment that broke hearts everywhere. He described a boat trip with his young daughter. At one point, he jumped into the ocean, but suddenly realized he did not have the strength to swim back. His daughter had to pull him to safety. The man who once represented strength and confidence on television had been rescued by his child. It was a moment that showed how quickly ALS had taken control of his life. Then he said something that connected his present pain to a wound from his past. He spoke about losing his own father when he was young and how that loss shaped him. Now, he feared his daughters might grow up without him in the same way. He was angry, heartbroken, and scared, emotions he rarely showed publicly before. As he cried on camera, millions of viewers cried with him. Tributes poured in from across Hollywood. Ellen Pompeo, his co-star on Grey's Anatomy, shared how quickly they had bonded when he joined the show. She described him as warm, funny, and deeply caring. Patrick Dempsey, who played his on-screen rival and close friend, called him one of the kindest people he had ever known. Many others shared stories about his humor, generosity, and loyalty, qualities that fans rarely saw but friends never forgot. Yet the most surprising detail that emerged after his diagnosis was how much he valued real human connection. When people texted him to check on him, he often called them instead. Even as his body weakened, he wanted to hear voices, laughter, and emotion. He wanted to feel close to people, not distant behind a screen. As the tributes continued, it became clear that his life story was far more complicated than the public ever realized. The ALS diagnosis was not the beginning of his struggles. It was the final chapter of a life shaped by earlier tragedies, especially one devastating event from his childhood that left a permanent mark on his heart. Eric was born Eric William Melvin on November 9th, 1972, in San Francisco. His father was a Navy veteran who later worked as an architect, and his mother raised him in her Jewish faith. For the first few years, his life was ordinary and happy. But when he was 7 years old, everything changed. His parents separated, and not long after, his father died from a gunshot wound under circumstances that were never fully explained. Some family members believed it was an accident, while others suspected something darker. His mother told him to be brave and become the man of the house. Imagine a 7-year-old child suddenly being told to stop being a child. Only 4 months later, his grandmother, another major source of comfort in his life, died suddenly from a medical emergency. In less than a year, he lost two of the most important people he depended on. Those losses shaped his personality in ways that stayed with him forever. He later admitted that it taught him not to trust stability because everything could disappear without warning. He struggled to form deep connections, especially with other men, because he never had a father figure to guide him. He often tried to become whatever he thought others wanted him to be, hoping that would make people stay. As a teenager, he searched for a way to escape the pain and uncertainty he carried inside. Acting eventually became that escape. With very little money and no connections, he moved to Los Angeles determined to build a new life. What followed was more than a decade of rejection, small roles, and near-constant uncertainty. Success did not come quickly or easily, but the boy who had been forced to grow up to soon refused to give up. He kept chasing a future he could barely imagine, hoping that somewhere ahead there was a place where he would finally feel safe, valued, and whole. That breakthrough was coming, but it would bring new pressures, new temptations, and new struggles that would test him in ways he never expected. The road from a struggling young actor to one of the most recognizable faces on television was long, painful, and filled with rejection. When Eric arrived in Los Angeles as a teenager, he had almost nothing, very little money, no powerful connections, and no guarantee that his dream would ever work out. For years, he took whatever small roles he could find. A single episode here, a background appearance there. He appeared briefly on shows like Saved by the Bell, The Wonder Years, and Roseanne, but none of these roles made him famous. Most viewers never even noticed him. For more than a decade, he lived with the constant fear that his career might never take off. Hollywood is filled with talented people who never get their moment, and he worried he might become one of them. During those years, he also struggled with loneliness and the emotional wounds he had carried since childhood. He wanted to belong somewhere, to feel accepted, and sometimes that desire led him toward unhealthy choices and influences. Everything changed in early 2006 when he was cast in what was supposed to be a single-episode role on Grey's Anatomy. He was hired to play Dr. Mark Sloan, a confident plastic surgeon with a complicated past. The character was meant to appear briefly as part of a dramatic storyline involving Derek Shepherd and his estranged wife. No one expected this character to become a fan favorite. But from the moment Eric appeared on screen, audiences were captivated. In his very first appearance, Mark Sloan walked out of a bathroom wrapped only in a towel, completely confident and unapologetic. The scene instantly became iconic. Fans flooded social media and discussion forums, demanding more of this new character. The producers quickly realized they had discovered something special. What was supposed to be a short appearance turned into a permanent role. Mark Sloan soon earned the nickname McSteamy, a playful counterpart to Derek Shepherd's McDreamy. The rivalry and friendship between the two characters became one of the most loved dynamics on the show. Behind the scenes, Eric formed a close friendship with actor Patrick Dempsey, and that chemistry translated naturally onto the screen. Viewers believed their bond because it was real. Over the next several seasons, Mark Sloan evolved from a charming troublemaker into a deeply layered character capable of love, loyalty, and vulnerability. His romantic storyline with Lexi Gray became one of the show's most emotional arcs, filled with heartbreak and longing. Fans watched him grow, make mistakes, and try to become a better man. In many ways, The character mirrored Eric's own journey, a man trying to heal from past pain while searching for stability and love. After 13 years of struggling, Eric suddenly found himself at the center of global fame. He attended award shows, appeared on magazine covers, and was recognized everywhere he went. In 2007, he and the cast won a Screen Actors Guild Award, a moment that felt like validation for all the years he had spent wondering if he would ever succeed. But fame did not erase the insecurities and trauma inside him. If anything, it amplified them. Behind the confident smile and charming interviews, Eric was fighting battles that few people knew about. He had struggled with substance use since high school, originally experimenting because he wanted to fit in with the people around him. As his fame grew, so did the pressure, and the temptation to escape through alcohol and drugs became harder to resist. The lifestyle of a television star, long hours, constant attention, and easy access to substances, created a dangerous environment for someone already vulnerable. The situation worsened during the 2007 to 2008 writers' strike, when production on Grey's Anatomy shut down. Suddenly, he had too much free time and no routine to keep him grounded. What started as casual use quickly escalated into a serious problem. He later admitted that during much of his time on the show, he was struggling more than he was stable. In 2009, a private scandal involving a leaked personal video brought intense public scrutiny and humiliation. Tabloids followed his every move, turning his private pain into entertainment headlines. 2 years later, while his wife Rebecca Gayheart was pregnant with her second child, he entered treatment for an addiction to prescription painkillers that had begun after a sports injury. It was a desperate attempt to regain control of his life before everything collapsed completely. By 2012, the strain had become impossible to hide. Eric later admitted that he did not choose to leave Grey's Anatomy as much as he was pushed out because of his struggles. His character, Mark Sloan, was written off the show after a tragic storyline involving a plane crash. In his final moments on screen, the character delivered a speech that would become unforgettable to fans. He spoke about the importance of telling people you love them, even when it is frightening. The words resonated deeply because they reflected something true about Eric himself, a man who understood loss and regret more than most. Leaving the show was devastating. He had lost not only a career-defining role, but also the sense of identity that came with it. For years, he had been McSteamy, a character loved by millions. Without that role, he had to confront who he was without the fame and attention. Yet life did not stop. He found another opportunity when he was cast as the lead in The Last Ship, a military drama that allowed him to reinvent himself as a strong, disciplined leader. The show ran for 5 seasons and proved that he could carry a series on his own. It was a chance to rebuild his confidence and show the world, and himself, that he was more than one famous role. But even as his career stabilized, another invisible struggle was growing inside him. This one was not about addiction or public scandal. It was something quieter and more frightening because it had no clear cause and no easy solution. He began waking up some mornings unable to move, unable to find motivation, unable to feel hope. The man who had fought so hard to survive childhood trauma, professional rejection, and personal demons was now facing a battle inside his own mind. And this time, strength alone would not be enough. After leaving the role that had defined his career, Eric was determined to prove that he could stand on his own. That opportunity came when he was cast as Captain Tom Chandler in The Last Ship, a high-intensity military drama produced by Michael Bay. For 5 seasons, he carried the show as its lead, portraying a disciplined naval officer trying to save the world during a global crisis. The role demanded strength, authority, and emotional depth, and he delivered all of it. It was steady work, a fresh start, and a chance to rebuild both his career and his confidence. For a while, it seemed like he was finally finding balance. He was working consistently, raising his daughters, and slowly repairing the parts of his life that had been damaged by addiction and public scrutiny. But in 2017, something unexpected happened. Production on a show suddenly paused, not because of budget issues or scheduling conflicts, but because the star himself could not continue. Eric was battling severe clinical depression. Depression is often misunderstood, especially when it affects someone who appears successful from the outside. Eric later explained that what frightened him most was that he could not identify a clear reason for feeling the way he did. He had a career, a family, financial stability, all the things people usually associate with happiness. Yet every morning felt heavy, like carrying an invisible weight that would not lift. Some days, he could not even get out of bed. That summer, he spoke openly about his struggle on the Today, something that few leading men in Hollywood had ever done so publicly. He admitted that he had taken time off to seek treatment and that he felt conflicted because he believed he had no right to be depressed. He also revealed that he had started taking an antidepressant medication and deliberately said its name on national television. By doing so, he hoped to remove some of the shame surrounding mental health treatment, especially for men who often feel pressure to appear strong at all times. While seeking help was a brave step, depression had already seeped into every part of his life, including his marriage to Rebecca Gayheart. In February 2018, after 14 years together, she filed for divorce. Their relationship had endured addiction, scandals, and years of emotional strain. Now, the distance between them felt too large to bridge. To the public, it looked like the end of a love story. But their bond proved to be more complicated than any headline suggested. The divorce was never finalized. They separated and lived apart, yet they remained deeply connected through their shared love for their daughters. Over time, their relationship transformed into something quieter but still meaningful, a partnership built on family rather than romance. Rebecca later described it as a different kind of love, one rooted in history, respect, and shared responsibility. During this period, Eric continued searching for roles that challenged him emotionally rather than just physically. In 2019, he found one that would become the most personal performance of his career. He was cast as Cal Jacobs in Euphoria, a complex character hiding a lifetime of secrets behind a polished exterior. Cal was powerful, controlled, and deeply conflicted, a man living a double life that slowly consumed him from the inside. Eric later admitted that he understood the character on a deeply personal level. He knew what it felt like to present one image to the world while privately struggling with pain, shame, and fear. His performance was widely praised for its honesty and vulnerability. Critics called it the role that finally allowed audiences to see his true range as an actor. It was as if all the experiences he had survived, childhood trauma, addiction, depression, had prepared him for this moment. Just when it seemed like his life was stabilizing again, the first signs of ALS began to appear. At first, it was only a weakness in his hand, something easy to ignore. But as the symptoms progressed, he realized this was different from anything he had faced before. Doctors confirmed the diagnosis after months of tests, and suddenly he was confronting a disease with no cure. Most people might have withdrawn from public life after hearing such news. Instead, Eric chose to keep working. He filmed scenes for upcoming projects, determined not to let the disease define his final years. The cast and crew around him adjusted schedules and filming methods to accommodate his physical limitations because they understood how much continuing to work meant to him. At the same time, he transformed his personal tragedy into a mission. He became a vocal advocate for ALS awareness and research funding, partnering with organizations dedicated to finding treatments and supporting patients. He met with lawmakers, participated in campaigns, and used his public platform to draw attention to the disease. Rather than focusing only on his own suffering, he focused on helping others who would face the same diagnosis in the future. By late 2025, the disease had progressed to the point where he needed a wheelchair full-time. Everyday tasks became increasingly difficult, yet he remained determined to stay present in his daughters' lives. He often spoke about wanting them to remember not just his illness, but his love, his humor, and his strength. In one of his final public messages, he wrote that ALS was taking something from him every day, but would never take his spirit. Those words captured the essence of who he had become, a man who had faced loss after loss, and still refused to surrender his humanity. As his condition worsened in early 2026, the world began to realize that time was running out. Fans, friends, and colleagues watched with a mixture of admiration and heartbreak as he continued fighting with quiet dignity. The boy who had been told to be strong at 7 years old had spent his entire life proving that strength comes in many forms. Not just physical power, but the courage to keep loving, creating, and hoping even when the future is uncertain. And soon, the final chapter of his story would arrive, leaving behind a legacy far greater than fame. As the final year of his life unfolded, Eric understood something that many people spend decades trying to accept. Time had become precious in a way it had never been before. ALS was advancing steadily, taking away his physical strength piece by piece. By late 2025, he relied on a wheelchair full-time, and even simple movements required assistance. Yet those who spent time with him noticed something remarkable. While his body weakened, his presence seemed to grow stronger. He listened more closely, spoke more honestly, and held on to the people he loved with a quiet intensity that words could not fully describe. Instead of withdrawing from the world, Eric Dane chose to face it head-on. He became one of the most visible advocates for ALS research and awareness in the country. He partnered with organizations dedicated to finding treatments and pushed lawmakers to increase funding for scientific research. He traveled to Washington, D.C., met with officials, and spoke not as a celebrity, but as a father and human being confronting a devastating reality. His message was simple. No family should have to watch someone they love disappear slowly while their mind remains trapped inside a failing body. In recognition of his advocacy, he received several honors, including being named an Advocate of the Year by ALS organizations. Publications highlighted his efforts to turn personal suffering into a mission that could help others. He often said that if his voice could bring attention to the disease and accelerate research, then his struggle would have meaning beyond his own life. Despite the seriousness of his condition, he continued working for as long as possible. Scenes he filmed for Euphoria were completed with careful adjustments from the cast and crew, who wanted to support him in every way they could. Acting had always been more than a job to him. It was a way to process pain, to transform emotion into something creative and lasting. Being able to continue performing, even as his body failed, gave him a sense of purpose. He also took on a guest role in Brilliant Minds, portraying a firefighter secretly living with ALS. The role felt deeply personal, almost like a reflection of his own life. Through that performance, he showed audiences the emotional reality of the disease, the fear, the denial, and the determination to protect loved ones from pain for as long as possible. At home, his focus was on his daughters and on maintaining a sense of normalcy for them. His relationship with Rebecca Gayheart had evolved into a strong partnership centered on family. Though their romantic relationship had changed over the years, their bond as parents remained unbreakable. They worked together to ensure their children felt supported, loved, and protected from the harshest realities of what was happening. Friends who visited during those months often described moments filled with laughter, storytelling, and reflection. Eric spoke openly about his life, the mistakes, the successes, the regrets, and the gratitude he felt for having experienced so much. He did not pretend to be fearless. He admitted that he was scared, especially of leaving his daughters too soon. But he also expressed peace in knowing that they would grow up surrounded by people who loved them and by memories of a father who fought until the end. In late December 2025, he shared a final message publicly, writing that the disease was taking something from him every day but would never take his spirit. The statement spread quickly across social media because it captured the essence of his journey. People who had followed his career for decades saw not just an actor, but a human being demonstrating resilience in its purest form. By January 2026, his health had declined significantly. He was too ill to attend events held in his honor, though he remained deeply touched by the support pouring in from fans and colleagues around the world. Messages arrived from people who had been inspired by his performances, by his honesty about addiction and depression, and by his courage in the face of ALS. Many shared personal stories of how his openness had encouraged them to seek help or to cherish their loved ones more deeply. On February 19, 2026, surrounded by family, he passed away peacefully. The date carried profound symbolism. Exactly 20 years after his first appearance on Grey's Anatomy as Dr. Mark Sloan, the role that had changed his life forever. It felt like the closing of a circle, the end of a story that had touched millions of hearts. News of his passing triggered an outpouring of grief and remembrance across the world. Co-stars, friends, and fans shared memories of his kindness, humor, and generosity. Many spoke about how he made people feel seen and valued, whether they were fellow actors, crew members, or strangers who met him briefly. His legacy was not just the characters he played, but the humanity he carried into every interaction. Perhaps the most powerful part of his story is that he never allowed himself to be defined by a single chapter. He was not only the handsome doctor from a hit television show, not only the man who struggled with addiction, not only the patient battling a terminal illness. He was all of those things and more: a father, a friend, an artist, and a survivor of countless invisible battles. His life reminds us that strength is not about never falling. It is about rising again and again, even when rising becomes harder each time. It is about loving deeply despite the risk of loss, speaking honestly despite fear, and continuing to hope even when the future feels uncertain. In the end, the words he once spoke through his most famous character became a reflection of his own life. If you love someone, tell them. Say it loudly. Say it while you still can. Because time, as he learned too well, is never guaranteed.